Hello and welcome to the Xtra Edge, a sports analytics podcast powered by KINEXON Sports. Please like and subscribe on any and all of the platforms you prefer to listen to your podcast. I'm Dave Grudzinski, and today we're talking with Phillip Tandrup Holm, who, after collecting data for KIF Kolding, is now the new strength and conditioning coach for Skjern Håndbol in Denmark, which competes in the Danish Handball League. Coach, first of all, thank you for taking some time to join us on the Xtra Edge. Are you getting used to the coach title? I mean, you've gone from player now to master's degree, now coach. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a funny thing to sit on the opposite side of the table now, hear how the coaches talk about the players and what they're saying and all the insights you didn't get as a player.
Well, that's one of the that's why I'm so interested in talking to you, because I'm sure it's exciting for you to be going back to coach for one of the teams that you used to play for. And in this podcast, we talk about data and collecting it and then getting those insights and then taking action. Data, insights, action. That's what we like to talk about here on this podcast. And, I want to talk to you about data first because, we were talking before we started to record, and as a player, you said you didn't have data, so I'm very curious if you can talk a little bit about when you were exposed to it and then when you started using data.
Yeah, so when I was playing in Denmark, we didn't have any data. We didn't collect RPE or anything. It was just old-fashioned talking with the physiotherapist or the coaches and how the body was feeling, and just took it day by day. First time I experienced some kind of data was my last 2 years I played in Norway, where we collected RPE, but I'm not sure if they used it or they just were told that it was a good idea. Then when I retired, I started my master degree. And as the study, as we moved on, the study as the lecture ramped up, this data would keep coming up, and I thought it was very interesting because in football they use it a lot, but from reading articles and stuff like that, everybody does it in a different way. There's really no consensus on how to use it and how to analyze it. And then I'm a big handball guy, not that big of a football guy, so I thought, if somehow we could use it in handball, how it would go. And I mean, it's growing so big in every other sport, so why not handball? If you just get good at it and get to know the systems and the data and the metrics, for sure you can get something out of it. It's just a question of how long it will take.
Well, what I think is very interesting, I think your story is great because you were called upon by KIF Kolding to kind of help them make sense of the data. Can you kind of walk me through? So had you already started your master's and they contacted you, or was this just a, hey, I can help you and you can help me type situation where like, hey, I'm doing my master's, I need to do some research. I can do my research on you and help you make sense of the metrics?
Yeah, so when I was doing my master degree, before we started on the master thesis, we were supposed to go out to an elite environment to get some feel of how the environment was and stuff like that. That's great for people who haven't been in elite sports before, just to hear how the coaches talk and feel the locker room and be in this type of environment. It's very special. So, and then I knew I was going to do something with data and handball, and Kolding is the first team in Denmark to acquire an IMU system, and they were having some trouble figuring out how to use it in everyday practice or compare practice to matches and all this load thing, because it's really a jungle if you don't know what you're doing, and it takes a lot of time to getting into, and their physio or strength and conditioning coach are not hired for so many hours in the week, so they didn't have the time to really get to set up the system. So I asked, then they asked if I could come and help, because I would have all the time in the world at that point. And that would be quite an experience, and it was quite an experience. And the plus side was I got to collect data for my master thesis as well.
So how did you tackle this when you got there? Can you walk me through? So you look at the system, you're like, okay, first of all, I need to figure out how this works. How did you start and then eventually put together your plan?
Yeah, so when you when you have to be good at something new, you have to have a plan and a kind of a workflow going. So I started reading everything I get my hands on, read a lot of papers on how to use analytic systems, how to track the player load, how other sports would do it, what metrics to look for. I talked a lot with Michi from KINEXON on what the different kind of metrics meant, because the IMU system have some arbitrary units and they're really funky. Started to read the literature or the studies for how to use tracking system, and then just spending time looking at the data after every practice to see if there was some kind of link between what the players had done on the field and what the data was showing. And then talked a lot with Matthias, the guy who worked as strength and conditioning coach, on how we could use it, have to narrow down some metrics to go for, because the system provides hundreds of metrics. And if you just look after everything, you get overwhelmed. And then we talked a lot about how to translate it to the coaches so they would understand it, and in a way that they could use it in the practice. Had a lot of meetings with the coaches when they wanted to get these data presented. If there is something irregular, or if it's just we're going as we planned, or is there anything to look out for, so just got a lot of reading going, and got some knowledge about how the system was working.
So I'm curious, for someone who had never had any experience with this, let's start with the system first. Did you find the system easier to use than you expected, as far as setting it up and and the sensors connecting to the getting collecting the data, all of it? Was it easier to use the system?
Yeah, the system is quite easy to use, and Michi is very good at helping if you have any questions. So the part about getting the system going is not that hard. It's what you do with the numbers that's hard.
And so let's talk about the numbers. So what did you narrow it down to a certain number of metrics that you just kind of wanted to focus on first? Was that a way to try and, because like you mentioned, you have hundreds of metrics you're staring at, but you probably don't need all of those, especially if you're just starting out. How did you go about that? Did you just hone in on a few?
Yeah, in all the reading I read, we made some what's that called? Work demands for handball players. What intensity zone they were most in, how the game was going. Like, it's very low intensity, and then all of a sudden you have to do some explosive stuff. And then we narrowed the metrics down to see if we can see something about how the workload demand was in the game or in the sport. I mean, it's different from football, different from handball, different from rugby. So you have to know the sports before you start looking at the data.
Do you think that helped you a lot, knowing the sport, being a former player? That at least, or were you looking at it from a player perspective and saying, yeah, you know what, I would want to know about my jump height, or I want to know about, did you kind of approach it that way?
I could use my experience as a player for kind of knowing what the player were feeling, or how they would act in the practices or the games, and how I would like back then to be ready for a game, and talk with the coaches about that, and see if we could talk with the players about that and find some kind of rhythm. So match day -1 and match day -2 every week was more or less the same. going out for a good game or a bad game or.
Yeah. Did you eventually then, so do you have like the 2 or 3 metrics that you really kind of focused on, especially when you were first starting out, or do you still just focus on, do you have those 2 or 3 metrics? Can you talk about them?
Yeah, so we talked with Michi and we narrowed it down to the most, not easy, but most hands-on metric were accumulated acceleration load and exertions. And then we looked into the running acceleration distance to see if there were a lot of high intensity or medium intensity and how the practices then were related to the matches. So if they had like playing 7 against 7 in the training with the meaning of it being the same intensity as a match, we could compare the two.
And so were you able to see some things now that you hone in on these metrics, and now you're comparing practices to matches? Were you able to look at it and say, okay, yeah, now I see, or are you still working through that process? Did anything stand out?
My position was kind of in between because I was collecting data for my master thesis, so I didn't want it to implement as much as I would like to, because the master thesis required that I'd made a minimum effort to change practices and stuff like that, because I wanted to see how RPE and external load metrics were, if there were any connection, and how the weekly structure of the periodization strategies from the team was going. So that was more Matthias who had this job, but yeah. Yeah.
But even, were you surprised by anything when you started looking at the numbers, and, maybe even as a former player, were you looking as like, man, wish I'd have known that when I was playing? Were there any of those aha moments like that?
I was surprised on how similar the practices were, in the way that they generated more data on the days further away from a match, but the only reason they generated more data was because they were practicing half an hour longer. So the acceleration load per minute didn't change, and the meters per minute didn't change from them during the week.
So then, from a load management perspective, is this a good thing, or is this, is this good to know?
Yeah, because you can train hard. You have to train hard at some point, and you have the time when you only have one game per week. Let's say you play Saturday, then Monday, Tuesday, you have the option to make a hard practice, and that just wasn't the case here. That surprised me a bit. And also I had a preseason period in January, and also there the practices didn't differ from an intensity from the weekly schedule in season.
Yeah, would you say is that the biggest advantage though, having data in handball, is the load management aspect and being able to kind of handle that a little bit better? Because I know that schedule is so grueling. There's so many games. And plus, just the sport itself is so hard on the body when you watch it. It's like a combination of basketball and football and lacrosse. It's like a combination of all these sports. But do you think, is that, from a load management perspective, is that the biggest advantage data can provide in handball?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because most of the injuries that are happening in handball are joint injuries that can be related to load management, but with the intensity of the practices here, in this case, I wouldn't say that's an issue. But if you have a higher ranking team playing Champions League or the European League, of course, you would have to look into some kind of load management also for the players that don't play it that much. They have to get some extra meters running and some cutting drills, so they are ready when the coaches need them.
Well, and I know you have experience as a physiotherapist, so let's put your physio hat on. Do you think that data can help a physiotherapist as well, especially when we're talking about maybe injury prevention, but also return to play? Have you looked at it from that perspective at all? When you were kind of collecting the numbers, and did you stop and look at it from a physio standpoint as well and say, yeah, that could come in handy for a return, somebody returning from an injury? Did you ever think about that?
Yeah, you could. Of course, you could use it for that stuff to see what he was capable before the injury and what the demands would be when he returns, and then aim to gradually expose the player to this load. I work part-time as physio in a football club as well, where we use the data to the rehab.
Yeah, and now that you've seen data in handball and you've read so much about it, how it's used in other sports, were you able to make connections when you look at the studies and you say, okay, I can see how this metric can apply to handball, or at least we can try it over here and see what it'll tell us on our handball players? Or is it more about like you're looking for those specific metrics in handball that you want? Do you know what I mean? Like, or are there metrics that cross over that you can see in both sports and get something from them, get some insights from them?
You mean between football and handball?
Sure. Yeah. Let's just, since you're doing the physio with the football, like, do you see similarities in the metrics and the way they're used?
Yeah, not really, because it's two completely different sports. Football is running based and handball is mix of, as you said, basketball and wrestling and a lot of collisions and a lot of full body isometric work. And
yeah, well, that was one of the interesting things when we were talking before. Like you said, like sometimes it's hard for the system to pick, because there is so much. There are so many collisions and guys who are standing still, just trying to keep people off of them or back away from them when they're trying to get loose and make a throw and things. So that's something that I don't know if coaches realize. But again, that's what makes this sport so hard. And then you've got those quick accelerations, you're running up and down the floor, and and then you got the collisions. It's such a unique sport. So after looking at it all, I mean, do you think, was it the accumulated acceleration load that really stood out to you as one that's a metric we can't live without, or was there something else?
I'm not sure that there is one metric that's the golden metric, because you have to look at different metrics for different stuff. But for sure, the accumulated acceleration load is a sum of all acceleration the player made in the practice or the game. So that would tell in some way what he was doing when he was active on the field. But still, if you have, like, for example, a line player or a defensive player, they have a lot of getting around each other and pushing and pulling and blocking, and there are not many accelerations in that.
So taking your experience now of collecting data, and now you're the coach, what are you going to take with you from this experience using IMU, and are you going to be able to apply it now as a strength and conditioning coach? What will you absolutely take from the data that you will use as a strength and conditioning coach?
I think the biggest part I would take from this experience with Kolding is how to structure a week to make sure that the players get the volume they need, but also the high intensity they need.
Is it a situation where you look at it and say, do you look back on your playing career and say, well, we probably could have been doing a little bit more? Or do you look at it and say, well, maybe we would have been better off doing a little bit less? Is that what you're looking at? Are you able to find that balance better now that you have the data?
Yeah, just to be able to differentiate between practices, to make some practices focusing on high intensity stuff and some practices focusing on tactical stuff. And because when you don't have anything, no RPE or nothing, it's just goes by the trainer's gut feeling. And if the results aren't coming, I'm not saying that data for sure makes the results, but if you don't have data and the results aren't coming, the board or the sponsors or the people around the team, they will start questioning the practices. And the easiest thing to do for a coach is just either to practice harder or to just throw in the towel and say, I'm doing this and this, and I think that's the best thing for us to do. But again, it's just his gut feeling.
Yeah. When, as you look at this now, were there anything, did you do anything differently because of the data? Whether it was, maybe in the weight room or something, or maybe did you add some exercises? Because we're kind of into the action part of it, right? You get the data and then you start looking at it, and now you have to take some action. Did Kolding, change, or did you recommend anything, or did you see anything that might be beneficial for them to do? Like I said, whether it was in the weight room or even during trainings, did anything change?
As I said before, my job there wasn't to implement anything other than they were able to use the system. But there were a funny experience with there were two right backs. One of them got sold in the halfway through the season, so the other one was left alone on that position. And for example, if we had a tactical training or training on half court, and there were only one right back, 2 or 3 middle backs, and 2 or 3 left backs, the right back would have 2 or 3 times more work to do than the others. So we talked a lot with the coaches about the increase in load that he would experience, talked a lot about with the players and how he was handling, how he was feeling, and trying to think of ways to minimize his workload so it matches the others. It was taking a right hand to go play right back, or if you got an injury, you can always be unlucky with injuries. So if you got an injury, somebody had to play the position. So why not do it in practice as well?
Were you seeing the difference in his workload in the numbers? Was that a learning experience for you? Since this is your first time kind of going through the numbers, was that a good one to look at and say, oh yeah, I can see where his load is compared to everybody else? Were you able to see it in the numbers? Yeah,
we could see it. He was a guy who always practiced really hard, and so even when there were 2, he had 3 load for each practice. But when the other guy left, his load compared to himself before and after was also increased.
And do you think, think back to when you were playing and in a situation like this happens. Back then, probably, everybody knows he's probably doing a little more work, but does anybody really think about it as much now when you have data to look at and those numbers are staring at you and you're like, man, like he is really working. We're gonna run him into the ground if we don't do something. When before data, would this have been a thing, or do you just keep sending him out there all by himself, and just keeping that workload high? Does the data help coaches, do you think, make those decisions to say, yeah, we need to scale him back a little bit or come up with a plan, to better manage his workload?
Yeah, so before data, it really depended on the players and coaches' relationship. If the player would feel like he come to the coach or the physio and say, starting to get tired, I don't feel I have heavy legs for when the game start, but if the relationship aren't good or the coaches are not a coach you can talk to as a player, then I guess they would just send him out and hope for the best. But when you have the data, you can see that his load is increased, and then the coach can react or don't. It's in the end, it's the coach's call. You can just, as a strength and conditioning coach, provide the information that he needs to make the right decision.
I mean, that's really it. I mean, we're never going to replace the human element in all of this. I mean, coaches are always going to have that final decision, but it's just about using, the data to just kind of enhance that decision making, right? Kind of put a little stamp on it. You look at those numbers and you say, yeah, we need to do something about this. We need to change. Is that what you're taking away from your experience collecting all this data now as you head into the coaching world?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Just the data doesn't make the decision for you. You're still, or the coach is still ultimately making the decision. You're just using the data to help you make decisions.
Yeah, that's right. The main thing is still the relationship between the coaches and between the coaches and the players. The data is just there to support for a good decision.
That's awesome. As you and I know this is your first experience, working with IMU, but as you were working with it, was there anything that came up that you thought, boy, I wish we could do this with it? Is there anything missing, or are you still just like, yeah, no, it works great and it's telling me everything I need to know right now? But or did you come across something that you were like, boy, I wish it was easier to do this, or I wish we could get this?
Yeah. In handball, the coaching staff has unlimited substitution. Some players are subbed out for attack, and some players are subbed out for defense. And the IMU system, it generates data from you take it out to you plug it back in. And let's say a player plays like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, then you generate a lot of data, passive data on the bench. And if you don't have any way to know the playing time for this player, the data don't match the time, and then the metrics per minute will be kind of messed up. And also you don't have a way to see for example, now we talked before about the accumulated acceleration load, because it's also generated every time he stands up. If you score a goal or go to get some water or whatever, it generates data when he sits on the bench. So if there were a way to get around this, like with the IMU system, you can say the field is here. When he leaves this line, stop generating data. And then it starts generating when he goes back in. So a way to get all this noise away.
Was that something though that you were able to at least you knew about it after a little while? So you knew what the noise was versus what it was that you were actually looking for. Were you able to at least? I mean, it probably wasn't fun to try and have to figure that out. But were you able to as you go through the data say, yeah, okay, he's sitting down on the bench here. This is what I really need down here.
So yeah, I tried to get around this. I watched I think it was 10 games played and took 6 players and made a note every time he left the court, every time he was on the court, every time the game clock was stopped. Just made a note of everything he was doing with timestamps, and then going back to the system and cutting the game up for each individual player in these different timestamps to see what happened when you sit on the bench, what happened when you're subbed out a lot, what happens if you just play 60 minutes or whatever the player were doing, what will happen in this time period. And yeah, it was quite a big work. And then I tried to see if we could make some kind of formula to get around this. My idea was that if you know the average load a player will do if you sit on the bench, and the average load a player will do when there's a timeout or the game clock is stopped, then you could subtract that from the total load. But there was way more variables that I was able to collect or to get around. So that would be some kind of, what's that called in Danish? It's multiple regression. Multiple regression, it's called in Danish. I'm not sure the English word. Mm-hmm. And that was just beyond what I was capable of doing.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, it's.
But I will say I got a good feeling from these this work with these 10 games and cutting it into segments of what the player were doing in the different states of the game. And then the conclusion of all this work were that we just have to take the players who play a lot, above 40 or 45 minutes, and use their load as a guideline for the practices. Because if players in practice are on the same court and nobody stands out, then they must be doing what. If you have the guideline for a player who plays a lot, and you can see that his training load matches the game demand, and the other players in practice are on the same court, are not standing out, then they must do the same load in practice as the game demands.
Well, and I've heard this from coaches in other sports too. That the big thing with data, and it's there are growing pains when you first start out using data, but it gets so much easier as you build that. You kind of have your database, and you get that first line of data. So now then the next time you're going through, you have something to compare it to, and then the next year you have now two seasons to compare it to, or multiple practices to compare it to. That is what I hear from coaches is the big advantage, is when you can really, once you get that baseline nailed down, the comparison charts is what really will tell you, will provide eye-opening insights, is what coaches are telling me. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I use this study a lot. I can't remember who made it. Torres Ronda, I think it was, where they described like these 3 stages of using data, where there's a monitoring state, a planning state, implementing, describing stage, planning stage, and a monitoring. And we talked about the describing stage that could easily take a year to get like a baseline for the up and coming season or for the next season, because you have to have a big database to work out from. So it's not just plug and play. You have to, as a team, have to invest money in the system, but you also have to invest money in staff who can work with the data and who can make it work in the everyday life, because coaches don't have time, and also I don't think they have the knowledge and know-how about all this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's it. But you also have to pack a little patience, right? As it's going to take a little bit of time to sift through the data, but that's why we have people like you. Like, now you're an expert after going through all that, huh? That was all. You went through all that heavy lifting.
Yeah, hopefully someday I can call myself an expert. I'm not there yet.
Well, you're getting there. You're on your way. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that I should have, or is there anything else you want to mention as we wrap up here? Because this has all been great. I think this is such a unique perspective from somebody who came in cold and had to figure these things out, because that's what people are going through. But you made it through, and now you're on your way as a strength and conditioning coach. But is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, just that if a team buys a tracking system, of course you have to have some staff who can read the data and translate it to the coaches. But if that's on point, then the communication between the coaches and the data scientist or strength and conditioning coach or whatever you would call them, that's the main part.
And then being able to have those numbers, obviously, like we talked about, is such a huge advantage. So it sounds like you just got to be a little bit, be a little patient, be a little diligent, work through the numbers, figure it out. But all that hard work will eventually pay off, I guess, right?
Yeah, find your own way. There's no, in the scientific literature, there's no consensus on how to use the data. So find a way that makes sense for the strength and conditioning coach, makes sense for the head coach, and so that everybody is pulling in the same direction.
And if there's somebody like you who's out there just getting started using data and are looking for answers, looking up studies, reading studies like you were doing, or maybe they want to contact you, is there a way they could contact you if they have questions? Is there an easy way to get a hold of you? And then maybe you guys can compare notes?
Yeah, I'm not a big social media guy, but I think LinkedIn would be the easiest thing.
Okay, perfect. Because we hear that a lot too. Coaches love to talk amongst themselves and and pick each other's, because hey, it's still relatively new, and especially in handball, it's very new in handball, and so you have to turn to others for help. Phillip, I can't thank you enough for coming on and being just so honest and sharing your experiences. As somebody who is just starting out in data and collection, I think this is going to be very valuable to, especially in the handball world. All the coaches who are thinking about it, and maybe hopefully you've calmed some fears maybe for coaches out there, because that's the big thing. Once you get through the heavy lifting, it's a huge advantage, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking about it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me again. And if somebody wants to reach out, they're more than welcome to do. Love to talk about this stuff. Awesome. And good luck, coach. Yeah, thanks. Are you used to it yet? Are people, no, not yet? Am I the first one? We got to break you in, coach. You'll get there. You'll get there. But man, boy, they're lucky to have you, and I can't wait to see what you do over there. We'll have you back here on the podcast again and see how your first season went. So I appreciate it, coach. Hey, if you know a great coach who's doing great things like Phillip, winning games and doing it with sports data and analytics, we'd love to hear about them. We may ask them to be a future guest on the podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at KINEXON Sports, or look for us on LinkedIn at KINEXON Sports and Media. Remember, we want you to innovate the game by collecting the data, getting the insights, and then turning those insights into action. We will see you next time.